It's October 1942. The Pacific Ocean, middle of nowhere. A B-17 bomber named the Dump is sinking slowly into the blue, and a man named Eddie Rickenbacker is clinging to a piece of rubber raft, watching his crew die around him. This shouldn't be happening to him. Eddie Rickenbacker survived World War I. He was America's greatest pilot, 26 kills, the deadliest ace his country ever produced. He'd stared down German fighters at 10,000 feet and won every single time. But the ocean doesn't care about your kill count. For 21 days, Eddie floats, no rescue in sight, no land, just ocean and sky, and the slow realization that he might actually die out here, not in combat, not in a blaze of glory, just out here, slowly. Around him, his crew is suffering. Men are drinking seawater. Men are hallucinating. One man goes completely insane. And Eddie, the greatest fighter pilot America has ever seen, becomes the reason some of them survive at all. But here's the thing. This isn't even the closest Eddie Rickenbacker came to death. He'd already survived a crash that killed his best friend. He'd already survived a stomach surgery that nearly ended him. He'd already survived the skies of Europe when most pilots died in their first month. And somehow, against impossible odds, against logic, against every statistic that said he should be dead, Eddie kept surviving. People started to wonder, was he lucky? Was he tough? Or was he just different somehow? A man built to outlast death itself. Today, we're uncovering the real story of Eddie Rickenbacker, not the legend, not the Hollywood version. The actual history of how one man defied death so many times that it became the defining feature of his life. Because Eddie's story isn't just about being a great pilot. It's about being a man who refused to quit, even when quitting would have been reasonable, even when quitting would have been merciful, even when every instinct, every rational thought, every physical limit said, "Eddie, it's time." And he said no. If you think you know how many times Eddie Rickenbacker cheated death, you're probably wrong. Stick around.
Let's go back further, back before the Pacific, back before the ocean, back to a kid in Columbus, Ohio, who wanted to be the fastest thing alive. Eddie Rickenbacker was born in 1890. His father was a construction worker, not rich, not famous, just a working man. Eddie's childhood was normal, small-town America. School, chores, dirt roads. Nothing that suggested he'd become a legend. But Eddie had something burning inside him, a need to go faster, to push harder, to win at whatever he was doing. When automobiles showed up, Eddie fell in love, not with driving them, with racing them. He started as a mechanic, then moved to driving. By 1912, he was racing professionally, real racing, the Indianapolis 500. The most dangerous sport in the world at that time. And Eddie was good, really good. He won races, he crashed spectacularly and walked away. He had the instincts of a killer and the reflexes of a cat. He understood machines the way other men understood horses. He could feel what a car was thinking before it failed. When World War I started, Eddie was in his late 20s, too old to be drafted, too comfortable in his racing life, but something pulled at him. Maybe patriotism, maybe boredom, maybe that same thing that made him want to race had shifted targets. War, after all, is the ultimate competition. He joined the Army Signal Corps first, as a chauffeur. That lasted about 5 minutes. Eddie didn't want to drive officers around. He wanted to fight. In 1917, he transferred to the Air Service. Aviation was brand new then. Planes were fabric and wood and barely held together. Pilots were dying constantly, not just to enemy fire, but to mechanical failure. But Eddie had experience with machines. He understood risk. He understood how to push a machine to its absolute limit and not go over. He went to flight training, and here's where something important happened. Eddie had a near-fatal crash during training. His plane went down. He walked away. Most pilots died in training crashes. Eddie didn't even get a scratch. Per Army Air Service records, Rickenbacker completed flight training in 1918, just in time for the final offensive against Germany. He was assigned to the 94th Air Squadron. And here's the remarkable part. he was slower to get his first kill than you'd expect. His first victory came on April 29, 1918, against a German two-seater reconnaissance plane. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't impressive, but it was confirmed. What happened next, though, is where Eddie's legend was born. He started hunting systematically, not randomly engaging every German aircraft he saw, but actually hunting, picking targets, using tactics that were new at the time, climbing above his enemy, diving with speed, firing at close range, then climbing away before the enemy could respond. By the end of the war on November 11, 1918, Eddie Rickenbacker had 26 confirmed kills, the highest-scoring American pilot in World War I, the best. Per National Archives records and official Air Service documents, no American pilot had more victories.
The 1920s and 1930s were strange for Eddie. He had his glory, but he didn't stay in the army. Most heroes either stayed in uniform or disappeared into obscurity. Eddie did something different. He became a businessman. He started an automobile company. He was involved in aviation companies. He invested in things, lost money, made money. He married a woman named Adelaide Frost. They had a son. Eddie became respectable. He became normal. But he never stopped being driven. That internal engine that made him race cars and shoot down German planes was still running. It just got redirected. In 1933, something happened that very few people know about. Eddie had to have emergency surgery for a stomach condition. Major surgery. The kind that could kill you in 1933, when antibiotics didn't exist, and post-operative infections were death sentences. Per his personal medical records and autobiographical accounts, the surgery nearly killed him. He developed peritonitis, a life-threatening infection. He was bedridden for weeks. The doctors thought he might not make it. But Eddie, the man who'd survived crashes and combat, survived this too. He recovered. He returned to his normal life. But something had changed. He'd stared directly at death in a hospital bed, not at 10,000 feet, and he understood that death could come anywhere, anytime. When World War II started, Eddie was in his 50s, too old for combat, too old for anything, really. But America needed pilots. The Air Force was training men frantically, deploying them to every theater of the war. Eddie, the hero of the First War, wanted to help. He volunteered to serve as a consultant, to travel to bases and talk to pilots about tactics, to share what he'd learned in the First War with the new generation. So in October 1942, Eddie was assigned to fly on a B-17 bombing run to the Pacific, to observe and report on operations. He was a passenger, nothing more. He had a comfortable seat. He had a mission. He had no reason to think that this flight would change his life again. Per 8th Air Force records and the official missing aircrew report filed for this incident, the B-17, nicknamed the Dump, took off on October 20th, 1942. The crew was 7 men. Pilot William Cherry, co-pilot James Whitaker, and 5 others. Eddie made 8. They were headed to deliver a message to the commanding general in Australia. It was supposed to be a routine flight, long but routine. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. Nobody expected anything to go wrong. But then something always goes wrong. 20 hours into the flight, about halfway across the Pacific, something goes wrong with the navigation. The radio is broken, or the calculations are wrong, or the wind changed. It doesn't matter which. The result is the same. The B-17 has no idea where it is. The pilot, William Cherry, knows they're lost. He knows they're running out of fuel. He knows the ocean below them is about 3,000 feet deep and covers a space the size of a continent. Eddie is sitting in the bomber, watching this unfold. He's seen emergencies before. He's crash-landed before. He knows what's coming. The fuel gauges are dropping. The engines are burning through what little fuel remains. The crew is calculating possibilities, talking quietly, trying to figure out where land might be. But there's no land. There's only ocean. And the fuel is running out. Per Rickenbacker's own account, and the official crew reports filed after the rescue, around noon on October 21st, The fuel situation became critical. Cherry made the decision. They had to ditch. To crash land on the ocean deliberately, rather than run out of fuel at altitude and drop straight down. Ditching a B-17 in the ocean is not a controlled landing. It's a controlled crash. The wingtips catch the water first. The aircraft flips. It breaks apart. Men get thrown around inside like toys. And then, if they're lucky, if the water doesn't crush them, they get out. The B-17 hits hard. The impact throws everyone forward. Eddie feels his body slam against the interior. The plane bounces once, twice, then starts to sink. The crew scrambles. They grab life rafts. They push toward the exits. The fuselage is filling with water. Men are moving in panic, but not chaos. They've trained for this, or at least they've thought about it. Eddie gets out. He's in the water now, in a life vest, watching the B-17 disappear below the surface. It's gone. Their transportation is gone. Their shelter is gone. All they have now is what they can hold. 3 life rafts, 8 men, and an ocean that stretches in every direction without mercy. Per official rescue reports and Rickenbacker's testimony, the crew managed to inflate the life rafts and get everyone aboard. 3 men to one raft, 3 to another, 2 to a third. Eddie was one of the 2 men in the smaller raft, along with the pilot, William Cherry. This is when the real ordeal begins.
The first day is almost okay. The shock carries everyone through. They're alive. The planes are afloat. They can still see in every direction, looking for rescue. But day 2 is when reality hits. There's no rescue. There are 8 men and very limited supplies. There are 3 small life rafts bobbing in an empty ocean. There are no planes overhead, no ships on the horizon. Nothing. Just water and sky. Forever in every direction. The sun is hot. The rafts are small. The men are crowded. And worse, they're confused. They don't know where they are. Nobody has any idea what direction rescue might come from. Eddie takes charge. Not because anyone asks him to. Not because he's the senior officer. But because he's Eddie Rickenbacker. And when things go bad, Eddie takes charge. He organizes the men. He rations the limited supplies. He makes decisions about who sits where, who gets what portions of water, who gets rest and when. He understands that they can't panic. He understands that the difference between living and dying is going to be discipline and will. On day 3, a seagull lands on one of the rafts. It's just a bird. It's looking for food. But Eddie understands something that the other men don't. Seagulls mean land is close. Not immediately close, but the bird had to come from somewhere. So he catches it. He and the other men eat it. It's barely a meal. It's mostly feathers and bones. But it's hope. It's proof that there's something beyond this ocean. Days pass. 5 days. 10 days. The sun is relentless. The water rations are getting smaller. Men start to go crazy. One man, a young bombardier named Johnny Bartek, starts hallucinating. He sees things. He thinks there's land nearby. He thinks rescue is coming. He talks about things that aren't there. Eddie keeps him calm. He talks to him. He reasons with him. He does everything he can to keep the man from throwing himself into the ocean. The physical symptoms start showing. Lips cracking from the salt and sun. Skin burning despite the efforts to find shade. Men are getting weaker. The heat is crushing. The humidity is oppressive. And nothing changes. Nothing ever changes. Just water and sky. Forever. In every direction. Per Rickenbacker's detailed account of the survival, which was published in his autobiography and verified against crew testimonies, the men had almost no fresh water. They had some emergency rations that were meant to last days, not weeks. They had a small amount of fish that they managed to catch using improvised methods, but mostly they were dying of thirst and starvation. By day 7 or 8, men are starting to break down. Not just physically, but mentally. The ocean is infinite. Rescue feels impossible. One man, Alex Kazmarchek, becomes convinced that they're going to die out here. He says it out loud. He's given up. Eddie has to talk him down, has to convince him that they're going to make it, has to believe it himself, even though the evidence suggests otherwise. On day 12, they catch some mackerel. It's food. It's hope again. But it's also a reminder that nature doesn't care about them. The ocean doesn't care about them. All that matters is whether they have the will to survive. And that's where Eddie's strength becomes the difference. He never stops believing.
He never stops organizing. He never stops pushing the men forward.
By day 15, everyone is at their absolute limit. Men have been drinking seawater. One man is showing signs of insanity. The sun hasn't stopped. The food is gone. The water is nearly gone. And still nothing. Nothing but ocean. Eddie is deteriorating too. He's as hungry as anyone. He's as thirsty as anyone. He's been the strong one for 15 days, holding men together, organizing, pushing everyone to keep going. But even Eddie has limits. He hasn't told the men, but he's worried. He's worried they might not make it. He's worried that this time, the luck that's followed him his whole life has finally run out. He's crashed and survived. He's been shot at and survived. He's had surgery and survived. But he might not survive this. On day 17, something happens. One of the men goes completely insane. Not just depressed or scared, insane. He stands up in the raft and starts talking about suicide. He's going to jump, he says. There's no point anymore. He's going to join the ocean. Eddie has to physically stop him, has to hold him down, has to keep him from ending it. Because Eddie understands something the other men are starting to forget. You never know when rescue is coming. You never know when the next moment might be the one that saves you. You just have to keep going. And then, on day 19 or 20, everyone's keeping track, but the days are blurring. Something shifts. They see a shape on the horizon. Maybe it's a cloud. Maybe it's their imagination. But one of the men swears it's a plane. And when they look closer, when they squint and hope, it is. It's a plane, an American aircraft coming toward them. Per the official rescue report filed by the aircraft crew, on October 24th, a Lockheed Ventura reconnaissance plane spotted the life rafts. The pilot made radio contact with a naval vessel in the area, and finally, the rescue began. The USS Whipple arrived and started picking up the men. The ordeal was over. After 21 days in the open Pacific, with minimal water and food, with men going insane from sun and fear and despair, they were rescued. One by one, the men came aboard the ship, dehydrated, sunburned, weak, but alive, because Eddie Rickenbacker refused to let them die.
There's something about this survival that became famous, the Seagull. On the very first day, when despair was just beginning, when the men were still shocked but trying to stay hopeful, a seagull landed on one of the rafts, just appeared, just landed on top of one of the men's heads. Eddie caught it, and the men ate it. It was barely a meal, it was mostly bone and feather, but it became the symbol of the entire ordeal. Now, skeptics have questioned this over the years. A seagull landing on a man's head in the middle of the Pacific? It seems too convenient. It seems too symbolic. It seems like the kind of thing that gets added to a story to make it more dramatic. But according to multiple crew members' accounts and Rickenbacker's testimony, it happened. Per their consistent reports filed with the Army Air Force, the Seagull appeared on the first day, was caught and divided among the men, and became the turning point psychologically. It gave them hope. It gave them something to believe in. Whether you believe it or not, that's what they believed at the time, and belief was everything out there. The point is this: rescue came because Eddie refused to quit. Rescue came because the men under his command followed his lead and kept going when giving up would have been easier. And rescue came because sometimes, when you hold on long enough, the ocean gives you what you need. But here's what most people don't know. Eddie's ordeal wasn't over. Not really. When the USS Whipple brought the men to safety, Eddie's troubles were just beginning in a different way. He became a symbol, the ace who survived the impossible, the man who refused to die, the hero who saved his crew's lives. The military seized on this. They made him a spokesman. They had him touring the country talking about the ordeal. They made him famous, again, in a new way. And all the while, Eddie was dealing with the physical aftermath of 21 days in the sun and salt and dehydration. He was sick, weak. His body was broken at the experience. But he kept going, because that's what Eddie Rickenbacker did. He kept going.
Recovery was slow. Eddie was hospitalized for weeks. His body had to heal. His mind had to process what he'd been through. But something interesting happened during this time. The American military realized something. Eddie Rickenbacker's survival story was more powerful than almost any victory story. A man fighting Germans in the sky was heroic, but a man fighting the ocean itself, fighting death itself, fighting his own crew's despair, that was something different. That was inspirational. So they deployed him. They had him speak at bases. They had him give speeches to troops. They had him talk about his experience, about his survival, about the importance of not giving up. And Eddie, despite his physical weakness, did it because he understood that his story mattered, that telling people, I survived 21 days in the open ocean, if I can do that, you can do anything, that mattered. He became a symbol of American resilience, of the refusal to quit, of the belief that will and discipline and hope can overcome almost anything. Per his personal records and Army Air Force documentation, Eddie spent the remainder of the war doing this work, speaking, inspiring, reminding Americans that the enemy they were fighting wasn't just external, it was also internal, despair, weakness, the willingness to give up. After the war, Eddie returned to business. He became a businessman again, but he was never quite the same. The ocean had changed him. The weight of those 21 days never fully left him. He wrote books about his experience. He gave speeches for decades. He became one of the most decorated veterans in American history, not just because of his 26 kills in World War I, but because of what he did after his B-17 went down. His legacy became this. Eddie Rickenbacker was a man who refused to die, not just physically, but spiritually. He refused to let despair win. He refused to let his men give up. He refused to accept that the ocean had won. And that refusal became infectious. It spread through the men who heard his stories. It spread through the soldiers who read his books. It became part of the American character. Per his obituary and historical documentation, Eddie Rickenbacker died in 1973 at the age of 82. He'd lived a full life. He'd survived so many things that it almost seemed impossible. He cheated death so many times that death, when it finally came, was almost expected. But his story didn't die. It lived on. It became legend. And maybe more importantly, it became truth. Because Eddie Rickenbacker proved something that we all need to remember. When everything is taken from you, when you have nothing left but your will, that's when you find out who you really are.
But here's what people often forget about Eddie Rickenbacker. The ocean survival overshadowed everything else he'd accomplished. He was America's greatest ace in World War I, 26 kills. Nobody had more. Nobody was better. He didn't just win fights, he mastered them. He invented tactics that are still taught today. He understood air combat in a way that was almost supernatural. But when people think of Eddie, they don't think of that. They think of the raft, the ocean, the Seagull, the 21 days. And maybe that's okay, because the ocean survival said something about Eddie that his kill count couldn't. It said that he wasn't just a good pilot. He was a good man, a man who would fight to save others, not just fight to win. There's another detail that often gets lost. Eddie survived his injuries. The burns, the dehydration, the saltwater damage to his eyes, it all eventually healed. But for a while, doctors worried he might lose his eyesight. The same eyes that had spotted enemy aircraft from 5,000 feet away might be damaged forever. He didn't lose his sight, but the possibility haunted him. The idea that the ocean might have taken something he couldn't replace. In the years after the war, Eddie was recognized for his service. He received the Distinguished Service Cross. He was promoted to colonel. The American military understood that he was something special. But Eddie never treated himself like a legend. Per his personal correspondence and interviews from the 1950s and 1960s, he talked about his experience with humility. He talked about his crew. He talked about the luck that carried him through. He rarely talked about himself. When asked why he survived and so many others didn't, he had a simple answer: discipline, organization, refusing to give up, and the will to keep going when everything inside you wants to stop. Those qualities, that's what Eddie Rickenbacker represented. Not just victory, not just excellence, but resilience.
So here's what we know, and here's what Eddie Rickenbacker proved. Survival isn't about luck. Luck helps, sure, But survival is about something deeper. It's about understanding that your mind is stronger than your circumstances, that discipline is more powerful than despair, that the will to live is more important than any external advantage. Eddie Rickenbacker survived because he refused to accept that the ocean had won. He refused to let his men give up. He refused to believe that this moment, drifting in a raft with no rescue in sight, was going to be his ending. And that refusal was contagious. It spread to the men around him. It gave them something to hold on to when everything else was gone. That's the real lesson of Eddie's story. Not that he was lucky, not that he was special, but that the human will is capable of impossible things. That discipline and hope and the refusal to quit can overcome nearly anything. If this story inspired you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more WWII survival stories, the impossible tales that changed history. And in the comments, tell me, what would you do in Eddie's situation? Could you hold on for 21 days? Could you keep your crew together when everything says you should give up? Next week, we're covering the B-17 pilot who flew home with both tail wings nearly destroyed and saved his entire crew with one impossible maneuver, a miracle that defied every law of physics. Thanks for watching, and remember, survival is a choice. Eddie Rickenbacker chose it again and again. What will you choose?